And Logan. Oh, and Bruce, yep.
Yeah, that was a mistake.
No.
Okay.
No.
I don't see it.
I just declined.
Okay.
All right, and then Bruce as well.
Yeah, I
Should
don't,
be.
I'm not sure Bruce was. planning on joining.
Well, I think he's got a
Yeah, presentation.
part.
Okay.
This one, Lindy said yeah, but she didn't.
Can you hear us okay, Caitlin?
Great, we'll get going. I will call to order this meeting of the Addison Central School District, April 11th, 6:30. I'm Victoria Jetty. And we'll go to my left. Introduction. Suzanne Buck.
Mary Gill.
Brian Bauer.
Barbara Wilson.
Jamie McCallum.
Joanna Doria.
Chip Malcolm.
Mary Heather Noble. Jen Newseeder.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Peter Conlon.
And online we have Caitlin,
Caitlin Steele, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Logan,
Logan Price, Business Manager.
Bruce,
Bruce McIntyre, Director of Facilities.
and it looks like Lindsay is trying to join us. Why don't we have administrators back here introduce yourself?
Nicole Carter, Director of Equity and Student Services. Jen Kravitz, Principal. Mary Hogan.
Justin Campbell, High School Principal.
Sean Farrell, High School Athletic Director.
Great, thank you. And Lindsay is online.
I think
Are you-
maybe you can hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Hi.
Okay, Lindsay Hescock. I'm trying to get my video.
Terrific, thank you. At this time, as always, we will welcome public comment. If there's anyone in the room who has a public comment or online, if you're online, please raise your Zoom hand. Or in, okay. You could introduce yourself.
I will. Yeah. You mind if I sit myself? I have a statement to read. So good evening. I would like to thank the board for allowing me the opportunity today. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Courtney Pantser, and for the moment, I am a 9th and 10th grade science teacher here at MUHS. I was hired to replace Ken Pallas, who decided to leave in June of 2021. I was interviewed and hired in June of 2021 as a full-time faculty member in the science department. I teach the MYP4 and MYP5 with several other science teachers here. At the time of hire or any time prior to January 18th, I was never made aware that I was on a 1-year non-renewable contract. It was after a meeting with Principal Campbell on January 18th that I was made aware of this and was told I would have to reapply for my current position if I wanted to continue to teach at Middlebury. I, of course, had many questions for both Principal Campbell and the district as to why I was not made known of this at the time of hire. I was told that Gail Leach, head of Human Resources, had told the 3 staff of this at this time. I can stand here today and say that after speaking with the other 2 staff, we were never told that fact. Among other things that were discussed, Principal Campbell told me 3 times within our conversation that he thought I was doing a great job and did not see it going to committee. I found it odd that he kept saying that, as if he were trying to convince me or himself of that fact. Unfortunately, he was incorrect, and of course things went way beyond committee and fair treatment. I have brought with me today all materials related to this discussion for the board to view. I had several meetings with Larry O'Connor and Reeves Livesay, our union president and representative. Reeves and I looked over all documentation for my hire, including the school spring advertisement, letter of hire from the superintendent, and the new contract from November that all faculty signed. The only thing that it showed was the word only on my November contract. However, it does discuss renewing contracts and when and how to sign the new contract. When Reeves went back and looked at his own contract, he only saw the word only. His did not say only. However, when I went back and looked at my past contracts from other schools I've taught at, that word only was on them. My past employment only gave one-year contracts to new hires and were able to be renewed with good standing at the end of the year. As you can imagine, I was beyond shocked and upset by all that was happening. I sent a letter the next day stating my interest in maintaining my position at MUHS as a science teacher. I would have my second observation with Principal Campbell 2 weeks after this meeting, which I felt had to be amazing to show him that I was worth keeping as a faculty member. I have included in my documentation copies of both observations with Principal Campbell, which will show my great observations of good standing with the school. My interview was scheduled for Wednesday, March 8th at 8 a.m. I was interviewed by a large delegation from the high school, which would include the principal, 2 members of my science department, our science special educator, the NYP coordinator, and a guidance counselor. When I was first interviewed last year, there were only 2 members of the science department and the principal present. Principal Campbell spoke first and said he knew that it was a very difficult process as an internal candidate and apologized for it taking almost 2 months for my interview to take place. I gave the principal several letters of recommendation written on my behalf from students. I told the hiring panel that I had asked students to write a letter for my personnel file, not for an interview, as I didn't want that weight put on their shoulders. As they were sealed, I do not know what they wrote about me. My interview lasted 30 minutes, and I was asked very difficult questions, one of which included how I felt the district was doing implementing IB. I felt this question odd and difficult to answer, considering I was also new to IB this school year. Did not feel I was able to fully and appropriately gauge how the implementation of this program was doing. I believe it stated as such and continued with some various thoughts on the discussion, which I had had with other faculty members from various departments. I had various thoughts at this time that this question would not be able to be asked to external candidates. It did not seem fair to single me out due to my internal candidate status. At the end of the questioning, I asked the next steps and was told a decision would be made either at the end of the week or the beginning of the next week. I knew that the other faculty had already had their interviews at the end of February or very early March and had found out either the next day or very shortly afterwards, so I found it odd it would take that long for me. This, of course, made me very nervous and cautious. A week would go by without hearing anything from Principal Campbell. I would go on to email him several times over the coming weeks, each getting a response that there wasn't time to meet, him blaming himself for lack of time, or that references were taking longer than thought to contact. I've included the email conversations in the board packet. A week after my interview, I would go on to have a discussion with 2 members of the science department during collaborative planning, one of whom was my mentor this year. I knew they had signed a confidentiality agreement, but I felt I deserved a timely answer as the other positions have received. I asked them point blank what was going on, if they had met as a committee to decide on what the holdup was. They both paused and looked at each other before speaking. I was then told that they had met, but Principal Campbell was looking into things. When I asked to elaborate, that's all they could say. I then stated I must be not a candidate for my own position, and I would have to leave as I could not stop myself from crying. Nothing was answered except for a blank stare. During the time before my interview and after, the department had been looking into future schedules. My name was on the Excel spreadsheet. Carl Engvall's name was highlighted as we were scheduling his classes for his replacement. At no time was my name highlighted to the scheduling process. I have added that document in the packet for the board. I was asked several questions regarding what I would like to teach next year. At the beginning of the school year, there were many discussions with Principal Campbell and the science staff about teaching chemistry next year, as it is what I am trained in and passionate about. Principal Campbell stated if that's what I wanted and other members of the department were okay with that, he wanted me to teach to my passion. I was scheduled for 3 classes in MYP 5, which is a 10th grade biology and chemistry class, and DP Chem 1 and DP Chem 2 classes. Linnea Manley asked if I was sure I did not want to continue teaching MYP 4 with her, to which I stated I was really interested in continuing to teach the 10th graders as we were writing fun and exciting curriculum and I wanted to see it through. Looking back, these days have haunted me. We would go on to discuss the schedule for many meetings and well after I'm sure the decision to terminate me from my position for the 2022-2023 school year was made. All I could think and can think of now is how could 2 members of the science department that interviewed me could allow me to see my dream schedule be made for the next year, and all the while knowing that I would never be allowed to teach it. Another week would go by without hearing from Principal Campbell regarding my position. With it being 2 weeks after my interview, I would send another email to him, this time attaching the superintendent to it. It would take the principal until the next day to respond. He stated we should meet and would have his assistant Deborah set it up. As I knew this would not be a good meeting I'd hoped for, I asked Reeves Livesay to join me as I did not feel I could be in this meeting alone. The meeting was then set up for the 6th block, as Reeves and I both have prep. The meeting would be set up for 1 p.m. As you can imagine, I was an absolute wreck going into it. We sat into Principal Campbell's office, and he came out and said I was not the candidate for the science positions. The school, as you know, was also hiring for Carl Engvall's position as well during this time. I was completely winded, and I could hardly speak. How could I not be getting my position back when I had 2 excellent observations, and the principal himself told me I had been doing a great job? Trying to speak was difficult. I asked him why, and he replied, there was so much interest in these positions which brought out very qualified teachers, veteran teachers. I am sitting there with almost 10 years of teaching experience in both high school and college, and apparently I'm not a veteran teacher to the principal. I pressed him for real answers, and none were given. He also stated that I'm not afraid to say this in front of Reeves. Everything I've written and said about you is completely accurate. You're a great teacher, and I would be happy to write you an excellent letter of recommendation for you. I can completely agree with your strengths as a teacher. As you can imagine, my blood pressure went through the roof. This man would write me an excellent letter of recommendation for someone else's school, but I was not good enough anymore for this school. We would go on to talk about how I was treated, questions I was asked that I did not feel appropriate, and the length of time it took me to get a decision. We would also talk about the schedule that was made with my name on it during collaborative planning time. He also said that he would be here to discuss things if I would need it in the future. Ultimately, I could not sit there any longer, being composed, and would have to excuse myself from his office. I remember saying as I was leaving, I was sorry if it seemed disrespectful, but I can no longer sit here with you in this room. He replied that there was no need to apologize and not disrespect was felt. I would leave his office and walk to Catherine Demon's office, our assistant principal. There was something personal I wanted to ask her, but I also knew that I could not walk through the school back to my classroom at that moment. She was shocked to see me in such a state. She invited me in to sit, but I wasn't able to sit. We discussed what was going on. She apologized for what had happened to me and then told me something that has stuck with me. Among other things, she said that I should forget all the adult stuff and focus on why I'm really here, the kids. She said that I knew she was straightforward and that she knows that I'm an excellent teacher, that another school will want me. We discussed how to move forward, and she asked me to give her the time to ponder these things. I had to teach a class in 10 minutes, so I went back to my classroom. As you can imagine, teaching 10th graders after what just happened to me was one of the hardest things I've ever done as a teacher. They had to have known something was going on, as I was not my normal self. I made it through the 80 minutes and had to go tell a special educator who would not be able to make it to an IEP meeting that day. Lisa St. Germain is my neighbor and has become a friend here at MUHS. She knew what I was going through, and in short, I told her what had happened. She was completely shocked and speechless. I also had to talk to Michelle Rath about a student before I left, and she noticed I was not myself either. She was completely shocked as well, especially learning I was not given a reason as to why I was not coming back. She said that was something that I was owed and not to leave this year without finding out why. In the days since this happened, I've had several people come speak to me, one of being Space Scaramucci, our science special educator who sat on my hiring board. She came to tell me she did not feel I was treated right and did not agree with the outcome. We talked at length 2 days after this happened, and it meant a lot for me as Faith and I have grown close during the school year relating our life experiences. John Newseeder, another close friend, and having gone through this himself, did not understand what had happened and how I could not be given a reason. He would go on to help me be here today. And most surprisingly would be the assistant principal herself coming to me during bus duty 2 days later. Kathy walked over to me and told me she had been thinking of me and wanted to meet with me. She also expressed that she did not agree with how I was treated and that she wanted to express that. She also said I should keep my head held high as I have done nothing wrong. Her words meant more to me than she'll ever know. Not even a week later, I would receive an email from our assistant principal that she had decided to retire in June. I cannot express my shock and sadness regarding this news. I met with Superintendent Burrows this past Friday. We discussed what had happened these past months, and he stated he was unaware of anything that I had done wrong or any issues with me teaching at MUHS. He said he would be talking to Principal Campbell regarding this matter. He knew that I would be here today. At this time, I have still not been given a reason as to why I did not get my position back. I went back to my collaborative planning meeting last week and asked them why as well. I was given the exact same reason from the department member on my hiring board as Principal Campbell gave me. There were so many qualified candidates. I am still in the processing phase. I am still trying to figure out what's next. I wanted the board to hear what happened to me and ask themselves why I was treated so differently than the other faculty that had one-year contracts. Was it because their supervisor was Kathy Deeman and mine was Justin Campbell? I don't know the answer to that. So many teachers are leaving the school district this year. This year has been the hardest in my career as students come back to full-time learning after the pandemic. No one knows except teachers what it has taken to get students to remember how to be students and their responsibilities as a student. These teachers, like my friend Carl Engvall, are amazing teachers that cannot keep going due to the rigors of what is being asked of them now. I had asked the board president to speak during an executive session, as I thought this should not be made public, but I was denied that request. So that is why I'm speaking during public comment. I know that speaking with you today will most likely not get my job back, though I have unfinished business here at MUHS. My hope is that by speaking to you today, that this does not happen to another teacher here at ACSD, not just MUHS. I don't want to see another teacher ripped away from the students that they love so much, like me. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments online? Before we go further, could someone,
We tried to.
oh, you
It
did,
doesn't
okay.
work.
Okay, that's okay. I'll just put my phone on.
That's not gonna
Oh, yeah, oh, that's,
It's a manual.
oh, there you go, perfect, perfect.
No, we tried it. Yeah,
Yep, perfect,
well,
that works. Thank you.
somebody tried it and couldn't make it happen.
Yes, thank you. All right, motion to approve the minutes of March 28th. please.
I'll move we approve the minutes of March 28th.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion, comment, question on the minutes of March 28th? I thought they were clear and concise, thank you.
I just want to make one comment. I think at the top of the board pack meeting notes, putting our vision and mission on there is really helpful. It's a constant reminder what we're actually here for, so thank you for that.
That was the objective.
That's great.
So all those in favor of passing the minutes, approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Lindsay, did you vote?
She
Did you
voted
get-
aye.
she did.
I'll
Excellent.
Abstentions, yeah.
Yep, and abstentions. All right, let's move on. Chip.
There were no bills.
Whoa.
You're here.
I even called her. It's, you know, she's not there today.
No, there were no bills for us to read,
That makes it easy, excellent.
so I have none to report.
All right, that's quick. All right, report of the superintendent. Peter is not here, as you may or may not have noticed. He is visiting colleges with his son, so Caitlin is here in his stead.
I apologize for not being in person. I am home with cold symptoms. I'm not sharing them with you. The superintendent's report is pretty straightforward. We have about 7 pages in the board packet on professional appointments, which are predominantly reappointments, a record of resignations, retirements, and recommended new hires. This is a work in progress at this point in the year, as we are very busy in the hiring process.
Great.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Caitlin, what is the deadline for teachers to sign, or have they already passed this deadline to sign the contracts? For
New
renewal?
contracts have not yet been released.
Oh, okay.
I would need to ask Gail exactly when she plans to release them and what the deadline is to sign them, but it's later this spring.
Okay.
Chip.
I had a question, Caitlin, as to why are we receiving this? You may have told us that, but we have never received this type of detail in the past, since the board basically hires the superintendent, who hires the principals, who hires the teachers. And so our part of this has not been in a specific way, so this is really quite a difference.
It is quite a difference. I would say that this topic came up in the policy committee when we were reviewing policies. We have one, and maybe Mary could speak to this. I can't remember off the top of my head which policy it is, but we have one that indicates that this information would go before the board, and so we're practicing that at this point.
Basically, the policy says that any new hires, the board approves or does not approve. So I don't think it's nice to get the whole list, but I think it's helpful for us to know it, but it's mainly new hires that the policy talks about.
In the past, it just went before the board chair, the superintendent and the board chair signed off on it. And now, with a closer read of the policy, it's supposed to come before the full board. But obviously, we're not actively hiring these people. We're not part of the interview, et cetera, process. We're just approving. Yes, Chip.
But my question really is, if we're getting that information and we are not taking any action on it, positively or negatively, I don't understand it. Even if it was approved by the board chair at some point in the past, assuming the board chair was acting for the board.
Right. We are going to take action to approve the professional appointments, even though it doesn't
say it.
Yeah. Mary Heather, did you have a question?
Well, I guess, yeah, two questions. One, is this, and I guess, those of you who are veterans of the board can answer this, if it's not indicated as an action on the agenda, can we take action? Yes, okay. And secondly, a question for the policy committee, is this requirement to have appointments approved by the board, is this something that is the SBA?
Yes.
Okay.
It's
And
in
so
their model policy.
it's a procedural thing that we're doing then, okay.
And it's something that other districts do across the state.
It was the first meeting when we discussed the consent agenda. That was sort of this is what sort of brought that on, that some districts have the minutes, the bills, and these housekeeping things as part of their consent agenda. We wanted to be able to discuss each one, and so we're not doing it that way, but it's sort of part of the regular housekeeping. And because it's spring, there's a lot of them, and there'll be many meetings, so I think there are none. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to remind everybody that the contract that we have with the employees is between the board and the employees. So that's really why there needs to be a procedural portion in the hiring process.
Any other questions on this?
You want a motion?
I was going to ask for a
I see
motion.
Lindsay's hand up on the screen.
Thank you. Lindsay.
This is regarding the names of the staff, faculty and staff, and the new hires are on there on page 7. And for me, I really like seeing the names. As I read through, I realized I don't really know most of these people, and so it's just sort of a helpful reference to have. So I appreciate including it, so thank you for that.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the professional appointments?
I'll move that we approve the presented list of professional appointments.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Abstentions. Great, thank you very much. And now we have a special guest, Sean Farrell, who is here with Justin to discuss NUHS athletics and extracurriculars.
Would you like me to do it from here or?
Wherever
Up front would be
you're,
better.
you're up front.
Yeah, that would, feel like I turned there.
Have a place for my
Yeah.
computer that would be helpful.
So my understanding is the board received the demographics from MUHS Athletic Department. So what this is it's basically giving you information from 2014-15 through current day. So you can see what our percentage of participation has been throughout those years. This is a document that I used to prepare for principal's reports at the end of the year.
Where is that?
I don't believe we have it in our board.
It came in
athletic.
different-
I have it.
It's there.
It wasn't there
It is
yesterday, but.
Yeah, it wasn't there yesterday.
Yeah, I apologize, I wasn't given any information on when to
Number 2,
submit anything.
under
Yeah.
report of superintendent.
I don't think I made copies, thinking everybody would have it.
We do have a copy machine here.
Yeah, but I don't have any copies.
No.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Does everybody have a chance to find it?
Yep.
Okay. So again, I was just asked to kind of bring you some information. I don't know if there was questions that people had, but you'll see that if we want to focus mainly on this year, obviously we have an anomaly with the spring of 2019-20, considering we didn't offer any sports due to the pandemic. It is interesting looking at the spring, the increase that we've had this year. It's probably the most student athletes we've had participating this spring, obviously clearly in the last 10 years. So we're pretty excited about that. There's another tab at the bottom which breaks it down from 3-sport athletes, 2-sport athletes, and single-sport athletes by gender. So you can see what percentage of our students are participating as 3-sport athletes, which a school of our size, it's imperative. We're too small with all that we offer to have students specializing. And that's what some other schools struggle with throughout the state is someone saying, I'm a soccer-only person. Not that we don't have people who are specializing, but it's not a big chunk of our population. So obviously we try to encourage students to be 3-sport athletes. Most college coaches, if they're looking to get that level, are going to want to see them participating in multiple sports, not single sports. It has a lot of overuse issues with that, where kids are doing the same body movements all year long, especially, certain joints can get really worn and sore. And at the bottom of that page, you'll see kind of what our percentage is of students participating overall. So we have 178 males, and that's just this year. So that's 61% of our student body for men or males. Total females, 136 at 64%, or 54%, and a total of 58% of our student bodies had participated in athletics this year.
Do you know, Sean, how that compares to other schools of similar size or whatever?
I brought this up at a state meeting recently, and looking at probably not the breakdown of male, female, and 3-sport, 2-sport, but the percentages for each season being in the high 30s, 40s is pretty common. It really depends, obviously, on the size of your school and what you're offering. We offer, use CDU as an example, it's the largest school in the state. We offer pretty much the same amount of athletics as far as sports. They may have 3 teams because of the size of their school, but we offer pretty much exactly what they offer. Actually, we offer, like, they don't offer dance, but we do.
I must say I've always sort of, as we talk about demographics and population decline, but we continue to either offer the same or additional sports. And I guess what's sort of the criteria that puts a sport on the bubble for not existing?
That's a great and difficult question. I've struggled with that. This is my 19th year doing this, and I've struggled with that sometimes. The hard part is, at the high school level, I can't necessarily make a decision based on high school participation without looking at the middle school. I'll use gymnastics as an example. We had 4 gymnasts this year. I think the middle school had 21. Of the 21, a good chunk of those are 6th graders. So we could look at it, if I looked at it just as the high school and not worrying about what is our feeder program, you'd say 4, how can we possibly support that? I have 1 returner next year. There were 3 seniors out of those 4. I know there's a couple 8th graders, but not a ton, but what do we do about the 6th graders? So it's that struggle of figuring out how do you make that decision. We have made the decision in my time here. We used to have alpine skiing, and it killed me. I'm an alpine skier. I used to coach when I was at Vermont Academy. But our numbers were so low, and there was no feeder coming through because the ski club wasn't thriving at that time, so there wasn't really students interested, so we ended up cutting our alpine skiing. We had done the same with golf, but now we have interest again. So if you see this year, we actually had 5 boy golfers and 1 female golfer. So that, to me, was a sport we had already had, so we tried to bring it back into the fold.
Do we have any club sports, Sean, at all?
Not club sports. Usually when we have something that's new at the high school level, if it's associated with the high school, it comes in as a JV program rather than a club. Volleyball was a kind of a pseudo club for us. We didn't adopt it as a MUHS club. We did support as far as if they need early dismissals to go off to a match and things like that. We support them that way. And we did the same thing for alpine skiing with girls back when we lost a team, but some girls were still interested, and we tried to support it to hopefully get the club or the alpine program back.
Okay, thank you.
And do you have numbers on kids who are involved in other non-athletic extracurriculars? I'd just be interested to know sort of overall how many kids are taking advantage of after school.
Yeah, I could create that for you. I did not create it for this presentation. Peter Burrows had asked me to do athletics, so I didn't think about activities. And activities are actually really challenging to get true demographics because they ebb and flow. So a student who may be involved in soccer in the fall, but really wants to do score, can't make a lot of the score meetings, but then if they're not doing anything in the winter, then they flow into score, and then they flow back out. Or some students are doing multiple clubs, so they're sparsely attending each of them. So to get true demographics for there is really, really challenging. There's certain ones I can, like a unified basketball, which I did include in here, which is technically a club, but it's athletically focused, so that's why it's in your report.
Of the teams, how many of the coaches are also high school teachers, and how many come and just coach?
Not enough. Very few. We've been working on that. In the past, when Bill Lawson was our principal on hiring, he would bring me, hey, we have candidates that may be interested in coaching. We've gotten some new, younger faculty that have joined the coaching staff. I don't have exactly the numbers. It's much better. When I first got here, I think at 1 year I had 3 total. And I came out of the prep schools where you coached, it was part of your contract. So it's getting better, and the more we can do in the hiring process to make sure we're bringing teachers, it's great. I do have actually, excuse me, some teachers that are not teaching at the high school, but they may be at MOMs or elementary schools, which is a challenge just for them to get free because we have early dismissals and things like that. It can be difficult for them.
Do you know the breakdown of where the students come from that play sports, like which towns?
I can. I don't have it in here. I do have it. We did a report a couple of years ago that had a breakdown per town, and I can do that.
So sort of the adverse to what Peter asked, how do you then decide if you're going to add something? You mentioned volleyball, so I know I have a daughter in middle school. I know there's lots of participation in volleyball at the middle school. So how do you decide whether or not that'll become an official MUHS sport or not?
The hard part with it, and what you have to look at is, as the activities director, I want to supply every student with exactly what they want. But you have to be careful on what is the impact going to be on the existing sports. And if we decide as a district or as a school, like, we don't want to offer this sport anymore, so we have room for another one to come in, because it will have an impact. An example of that is we had ultimate Frisbee. And if you look at the numbers in ultimate Frisbee, when we started out, it's a little small, and then it got really big, and now it's back to small again. And I always call it the new and shiny. Someone wants to go to something that's new and different. The intent with ultimate was, and how it was sold across the state was, this is to service kids who are not traditional athletes, who aren't going to play baseball or play lacrosse or run track. But they flow to it because the kids were there having a great time. So the track athletes and the baseball players were like, yeah, I'll try that for a little while. And they did, which we just got our JV baseball back this year. It's the first time, I think, in 4 years since we've had JV baseball. So you have that impact. It could just be a bubble and then it levels back out. It's hard to know. And the fear is if you add something and the program dies, once it dies, it's really hard to come back. Golf is one example where it came back, but it's small numbers. We only need 5 golfers to have a golf team. Yeah. If the impact was on field hockey or girls soccer, because it's primarily girls that have expressed an interest, I do have some breakdown of the March Madness from the middle school, exactly what grades and what sports they were playing or would be playing in the fall. So whether they decide to do volleyball versus that sport, kind of what the impact could be.
Yep.
So it's the great unknown, and I can tell you right now that when volleyball came up last year, my fall coaches that coach girls were not pleased that we're thinking about adding something new, because they feel they have the numbers exactly where they need them or they need more.
So I guess as we talk about needing enough athletes to fill teams, I also feel the concern about cutting athletes who may not be able to make a team, and therefore providing opportunities for all students who might be interested in activity. And so I don't know how those two things play. Do you keep track of how many athletes are cut each season, and therefore what seasons we might have opportunities to add something in addition to the sports that are already there?
I would love it if volleyball was a winter sport. It's not, and it's not because you can't get gym time, so there's no way to have it be a winter sport. Winter sports is where we have more cuts than any other season because of the size of facilities. Basketball, you can't have 30 girls on a basketball team. It just doesn't work because you're only playing 5 at a time. We don't make any cuts in the fall, and that's where this sport would lie, is in the fall. So we're not displacing kids off a team with no place to go. So that's hard. The schools like CBU, it's easier for them to do that. They'll have 60 girls try out for their soccer program. They'll run 3 teams, but they're still cutting 25 girls. So those 25 girls, volleyball's an attractive opportunity for them because they can still be active and just not in the sport they were. We just don't have those numbers that we're cutting.
In the fall.
Right. That's why I said if it was a winter sport, it'd be awesome.
And so you're able to track whether or not these are, the people who would pick, say, volleyball are already on other teams, and it's not that you're getting, because I love the idea of adding new opportunities so that kids who maybe aren't doing anything become engaged. But you're saying that basically they're athletes on other teams would be.
Looking at the March Madness numbers, I can hand it to you. I printed those out because I just did that this afternoon. Looking at those numbers, there's a lot of students who are playing soccer. Girls soccer was the biggest one, where they each grade it was 8, 10, and then 13 currently playing soccer. Not to say that they're automatically going to be volleyball players. We don't know that. Right, and so we can only go with the data that we have, which shows that there was a few cross country and a few field hockey, but the primary was girls soccer. Do you want
No,
that?
it's fine.
Okay.
Is transportation ever a reason students don't participate?
I would say, I'm sure. And again, I've been here for a long time now, and we tried doing late buses to support those kids, and they just were never utilized. So it's always a problem. We work within the teams hard to support and set up, so if a coach knows somebody's interested, but they live in Shoreham and their parents can't come get them, they look within the team or within the coaching staff to find rides for them to get home. I've had coaches drive kids all the way home before, if they weren't able to. I think anytime that you're in a district that's so spread out like we are, it's a challenge. It's less of an issue for Rice or South Burlington because they're all right in that space. But for us, it's always going to be an issue. It's just, what's the solution?
Thank you. Justin?
I just wanted to add a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to thank Sean publicly and his whole staff. Everyone has had their challenges in the last couple of years, but between the constantly evolving VPA rules and can you have fans, can you not have fans, under what conditions, it's just been a huge amount of work. So thank you for all of that. And I'd also like to add that participation in a co-curricular activity, whether it's athletics, I mean that's the focus of today's conversation, but Sean oversees all of our other clubs as well, is a huge protective factor for when you're talking about students' mental health concerns, right? Which, I mean, read any article, and for whatever reason, those concerns are escalating dramatically at the high school level. So I think it's really important that it says a lot about our school that we're able to offer such a robust offering to our students. And then I think, as a couple of questions came over here, I think today is a good first step towards both the deciding when to add a sport and the inverse of deciding when to remove a sport. I mean, I think that transparency about here's where we are, and then talking with you all who represent taxpayers, communities, and including those voices in the decision-making process is huge. But for me, as a relative newcomer to this community, I think we're really offering a lot to kids, and there's huge benefits there. There's the competition, there's sort of the life skills, but also those protective factors are substantial. And ideally, getting our educators to coach as well whenever possible is important too. So just want to add those thoughts.
Years ago, when Bill Lawson was here, and the board made it, at least I remember it, I don't know if it was a public commitment, but that idea of trying to be hiring people who are both going to be good teachers, but also could coach at a JV level or varsity level or whatever, was a huge attribute. And you have a few of those, but not very many. And we're lucky that we have so many community members that step up, especially in a lot of the sports like football and whatever. My son being one of them. But I know the time commitment. This is an absolute labor of love. You don't do it for the money, and you certainly don't do it to give away every Friday night and weekends from August 15th until November. However, I think the whole athletic part of it, and I've thought a lot about this over time, and I've been a huge supporter because it's not just for the kids, but this is the insight into the community. If you come to a football game or a soccer game, there's people there, not everybody is a parent of one child. They've come to football games or soccer games or ice hockey games because that's part of their community impact on the school. Whether it's positive or negative, but that is really important. So I think it's extremely cautious of everybody to not, when we see these ups and downs in different sports, to immediately eliminate something and think that's going to increase something else. It doesn't always work out that way. And for a school that's getting smaller, this is a big challenge, that's for sure. But I think we should constantly push this because it's so important. And as Mr. Campbell said, the mental health, any coach knows this is the outlet that those kids didn't have for a number of months, and now they are just savoring to get back into that again.
Which I would argue is the increase in our spring numbers this year. And
Yeah.
the fact that the winter was great, but we were still masked for indoor activity, and it was still like we're still in the pandemic. Now that the masks aren't in the school, they're not in the athletics, I think the kids, like you said, are just dying for that opportunity.
Yeah.
And the numbers are reflecting that.
I have one question. Can you talk a little bit, Sean, about those sports for which finding field time, facilities are a challenge?
I mean, like everything in the spring?
Is
Yeah.
this the turf ask?
Yeah, I mean, the spring is exhausting. The winter is long and challenging, but the spring is a day-to-day grind and it's exhausting. I probably spent 40% of my day today doing rescheduling, asking the college for use of the facility, talking to other schools about, can we use your turf field? And you know, it's always fun when they laugh at you on the phone because they need it, and it's tough. And the college is wonderful. I'm never going to say that they're not supportive. They're extremely supportive of our program and our school. Even I have colleagues who have other college facilities, and they're not given the access that we're given at Woodbury College. And if they are, they're charged for it, and we're not charged a penny. But with COVID and their policies, it's challenging. So we weren't there at all last spring, which, thank God we hired Ben Weir to be our track coach, because he came from a program where he did coach without a track, so he was built to come here for that year. This year, he's like, this is the first year I've ever coached on a track, so this is great. But it's hard because people will drive by the field and be like, oh, it looks beautiful. So you go down and walk on it and squish, 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 squish. And I protect the fields, but I also protect the athletes, because getting on those fields too early, that's where injuries can happen, and it's just not it's not safe. And I know it's tough to reschedule, and the kids are dying to play, but the more we wait, the safer it's going to be for them in the fields. But it is a real challenge. Yes, I would love a turf field, if that's the actual question. But
You get one with a bubble over it.
Right.
Just a quick anecdote. Last week, I think it was, I took the Middlebury High School track team, and we didn't get back until 8:30 at night. And I said to the coach, I said, well, now tomorrow you're going to get some rest, right? He said to me, he has to get to his job at 5:15 in the morning. So that's part of what's going on. I mean, it's tough.
that's the non-teacher track coach.
Yeah.
Which is a sacrifice that some coaches have made in the years past. We've had plenty of coaches. I always say I did a presentation for our parents one year about what's the ideal coaching candidate, and the first one was independently wealthy. The second one was own their own business. And you know, Chip mentioned the football program. I think 80% of my football coaches own their own business.
Yep.
So, and I have other sports where they own their own business, and it gives them the freedom to be able to coach because they're their own bosses. And the third one was really understanding employers. As much as we'd love to have teachers, and it's appropriate that Hugh's in the corner, when we have teachers coach, which is great, but we need Hugh and other subs that are going to be there to fill in, and our sub list is short, and Tina's always struggling to find subs. So that has a complication, but usually our teachers will buddy up and support each other if we can't find a sub. But that's one of the problems with having teacher coaches too.
One last comment. And my belief is that sports is a great equalizer. And if we're looking at equity in our district, I guess that's my hope. And I've seen that in the past, that it was a great equalizer. Do you feel like it helps students to respect each other, even though they're coming from different places, if they're on the team? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I always, at the 8th grade move-up day, when they come to meet us at the high school, I always talk about getting involved in activities clubs as a way to get acclimated to your community. Yeah. And you get built-in friends before the frenzy of going to school and those dynamics of classes happen. And I think that's absolutely true, because you're expanding your friend group just by the fact that you're on a team. And the more they can get to know their whole community, the better off all of our students will be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Sean or Justin? Well, thank you for being here, and yes, I was remiss at the beginning not to extend our gratitude to you for all that we know you did to make sports happen in whatever way, shape, or form they did in the last year plus. I know that was a huge lift. And I know my family was impacted in great ways by being able to participate throughout the pandemic, so I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That's what you do.
It's over here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. On to, everybody received the VHB proposal for the Court Charles.
You got a bunch more to go.
Oh, I'm in the wrong section. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
Waiting study for.
Oh yes, thank you. Okay, back to you, Caitlin.
Thanks, Victoria. The next person actually is Logan, who's going to give us an update on the waiting study.
Terrific, thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks, Caitlin. Like Caitlin, I need to apologize. I was also out sick today, so sorry I can't be in the room. Well, I had shared what I was gonna present with you. Do you share it, or do I share my screen? How do you suggest I proceed?
It would probably be better if you shared it yourself, that way you can be the one scrolling through it.
Fair enough. Before I do, I'll just give a quick background. You can see on the agenda, we're talking about weighting study projections. The whole concept behind the weighting that we're talking about is pupil weighting. There's a recognition that high schoolers are more expensive to educate than elementary school students, for example, because of sports, as we were talking about. Likewise, English language learners cost more to educate than non-English language learners. So we have a system in place for giving more weight to certain students, such as high schoolers or English language learners. And that additional weight basically gives the school district credit for more students, if you will, which means you effectively have more students to spread out your costs amongst, and ultimately it affects your tax rate. More students, more weighted students means a lower tax rate. The legislature is looking at updating this weighting system now. Actually, the pupil weighting task force, which Peter Conlon is a member of, looked at this at what could be done about updated weighting. And currently, there's a couple options on the table. First, and I'll bring this up. First, I'll show what the current system is, and then compare that to the two options on the table, and then quickly mention what projected implications are for our school district, depending on which option is chosen. So this goes swimmingly. Oh, so it kicked an error message. Host disabled participant screen share.
I'm gonna blame Sharon for that.
Then perhaps, Will, could you?
Under share screen?
Will, could you bring up the PDF?
Let me see if I can figure out how you can share.
He's a panelist.
Make co-host.
Make co-host
Yeah.
maybe? And then he can do it.
We'll make you the co-host. Let's see if this allows you to.
Then do you have to change the share screen
Pretty good
option?
start. Try this. Oh, this is what I want. Share.
Yay!
You got it.
Okay, let me get myself out of the way so I can see what I'm looking at. Okay, sorry, I was down at the bottom. So this is the report that the task force, the pupil weighting task force put out back in December, but this chart shows the comparison between the weights. So the second column, the first column shows the overall categories. The second column shows the different things that receive additional weight, or in the case of pre-kindergarten, less weight. So, for example, I had mentioned English language learners, the second one you see there, had a weight of 0.2. So basically, an additional 0.2 students, if you will. That's maybe a weird way to say it, but they receive additional weighting. Likewise, grade 9 to 12 received additional weighting, and like I said, pre-K received a lower weighting. Basically, they're less expensive to educate. It's kind of the concept here. One of the two options that the legislature is looking at is updating the weighting system, which you can see in the second column, the last column there, proposed value. So students in poverty, which is measured based on free and reduced lunch applications, whole conversation in its own. But students in poverty, English language learners, middle schoolers, middle grades, secondary grades, pre-K, and then they added some categories for enrollment. So schools with under 100 students, schools with 100 to 250 students, and then 3 categories based on population density. So they beefed out the weighting system is how I would look at this. This shows that they realize, hey, there needs to be a more robust system here. Let's look at these various categories. Let's factor in 6th to 8th graders, size of school, population density, and put weights according to those groups. More weights, the school district gets credit for more students, if you will. The other scenario is doing away with a weighting system and instead having a cost factor adjustment system. This page came from a report put out by the Joint Fiscal Office last month, I think. So the first column shows those different categories of poverty, English language learners, middle grade, second grade, etc. The second column is the same weights that you just saw on the previous page. The third column is the cost factor adjustment column, which is the other option on the table. So I'll use ELL, which is English language learners, as an example. So instead of assigning a weight of 2.49 to an English language learner student, the school district would receive an extra $25,335 per English language learner student. So a different system, a different way of going about equitably sharing resources. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'll stop talking. The question is, and I think this is why Peter wanted me to mention this tonight, is what the projected impact would be on our school district. This next page is really small, and it's all written on the next sheet, but this was also put out by the Joint Fiscal Office report. It shows, and these are all the schools, I just left the 2 pages in there. It shows that in either case, whichever system is chosen, whichever option is chosen, we would be negatively impacted. So let me, for simplicity's sake, I'll do this. If the updated weighting system is put in place, a baseline tax rate of $1.62 would go to $1.68 after 5 years, which would be a 3.6% increase. This assumes constant spending. It assumes no change in costs. The cost factor adjustment system would take us from that same base $1.62 level, tax rate, excuse me, and we would be at $1.77 at year 5, so a 9.6% increase. So an implementation of the cost factor adjustment system would more negatively affect our school district than updating the weightings. A question that Peter wanted me to answer was, what if our budget goes up by 3% every year, and we also can anticipate that our enrollment likely will go down, especially with a large 12th grade and 10th grade class rolling up. That would be about a 0.5% decrease in enrollment per year. If you factor in those two factors, 3% budget increase and a 0.5% enrollment decrease per year, it takes us from those $1.62 baseline numbers to $2 tax rate if weightings were updated, or $2.11 tax rate if the cost factor adjustment system was implemented.
Great.
Wow, that's a lot of good news. Maybe Peter could speak to, generally, I mean, obviously there's a big difference we're seeing between the weighting and the cost factor. And why is the cost factor hitting us harder than the weighting at this point? What's sort of is it the rural, I mean, I read people saying that we get hit because we're not quite as rural as the definition for rural, or what's
Well, so we don't qualify for the rural one anyway.
Okay.
But the difference between those two, it's really when you dive into the math, and I can't really explain it. It's sort of described that the weighting factors or the cost factor adjustment, which is essentially giving districts the equivalent of the weight in cash than doing the weight, is what they say, spikier. So that those who are negatively impacted are more negatively impacted, and those who are positively impacted are more positively impacted. Again, it's buried in the math. The math has been looked over many times and has been checked out. So I'll just tell everybody the status of this right now. This is the bill passed the Senate strictly with the using weighting, not using cost factor adjustment. It is now in the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the House committee that taxes everybody. And they're very interested in looking at the cost factor adjustment, just to explore it, but also it sort of attempts to accomplish the goal of this more so than the weights, in that it says it is more expensive to educate EL students or students from a poverty background, and therefore we're going to give you more money with the idea is that you're going to spend it. You're not going to just reduce taxes, which you can do with the weights. Now you can reduce, money's fungible, so it can offset anything else, and so tax rates can go down. So there, it also, if you go to the cost factor program, it gets rid of the whole idea of equalized pupils, which makes our system very confusing, and it's really just based on your population that you have. It's very much a hot topic because we're not alone. And in fact, we're not in the top 3. We're probably in the top 5 of districts that are affected by this negatively. And I've already just today, I've had 3 conversations with people about cost factor versus pupil weighting. And it's largely a policy decision.
And is it, so the weighting study, say we're impacted 3% in the weighting study, and we continue to spend the same amount, we make up the difference by raising our local tax.
Yeah.
If we, in the other scenario where they're giving, it's basically a grant, sort of a grant per pupil,
yep.
We're still making up the difference by raising taxes.
Yes.
So why is it?
Well, let's be clear. You're either raising taxes or you're
cutting spending. Right. So I had read something about sort of the discussion between one of the differences between the two models prevents, say, a school district who would rather take the tax break than spend more money, and the second scenario sort of eliminates
It
them
does,
being able to do that?
it doesn't
Do you understand?
eliminate the ability to use the extra money to offset other costs, because it's in the control of the local school board.
Right.
But it does essentially come with a stronger message of, here is money, with a certain expectation that you spend it on, you know, those costs that you are incurring extra. You know, whereas the other method, you're just getting equalized pupils, and you can it's plug it into the formula and lower your taxes, rather than using those equalized pupil numbers to draw more money from the education fund to spend on those students. It's a two-step process versus a one-step process.
Jamie?
Thank you. Thanks for this explanation and for that as well. So for the second scenario with the cost factor, is that mechanism more likely to help a district determine where the money gets allocated? Like, for example, if we get more money as a result of having sort of, let's say, poverty students, does that mean we spend more on poverty students? Like, we would dedicate more money to that, or same with ELL students or whatever it may be?
So it's a policy decision for the board to take up. Some boards might say, you know, we've been doing our job and spending the money to address these issues, and it's cost us a lot of money. We're going to take this windfall of revenue and reduce taxes, because we've already been stepping up and doing what we need to do. You know,
Okay, so neither of
the hope is that you know, every district will take a hard look at what they're doing to make sure every student succeeds and make the appropriate decision.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is no mechanism built in to determine that, correct?
There's no mechanism to force anybody to do it.
And one over the other is not more likely to have that distribution sort of outcome.
You know, I think that the idea behind giving money rather than giving equalized pupils is that it's an easier direct payment with a clear direction that it's supposed to go in. But ultimately, it's up to every board on how they want to spend their money.
Okay, thank you.
Jen?
I have a very basic question. Based on your slide, Logan, you had the year 0 and the year 5. Is that assuming that this won't be implemented for 5 years, or did he just randomly pick 5 years?
The idea at this point being discussed is that it's a 5-year phase-in, so that you don't get walloped with a negative, or, well, basically, it's a 5-year phase-in for those who get affected negatively, and those who get affected positively can take advantage right away.
To try to plan for it.
Yes.
And is it safe to assume that a pre-K is only valued at a 0.5 because they don't go to school typically the full day, so you're only paying the educator?
So that number, and just to clarify what was in there, the weight for a pre-K didn't change. What is different is that we've gone from a complex formula of multiplication and addition to all addition from a basis of 1. So there was never a negative 0.46, it was a 0.46 times 1 would give you a pre-K. And the other one, it's a minus 0.54 from 1 in a subtractive way, which gives you 0.46. Okay. Now, we didn't mess with the 0.46, it was come up with. The fact is our district, probably like many others, most of our pre-K dollars are spent in voucher payments to people who are attending private pre-K. And it was a number that we didn't tackle. The whole pre-K system needs a further look, and that's why we really just didn't touch it.
All right, I'll let you slide on that one today. Thank you for all your other information.
And just for everybody concerned, Ruth Hardy will be here at the end of May to have a even more in-depth. This is just sort of getting us used to the idea, what might be coming down the pike here, and so we're not going to answer all the questions today, just because there's a lot more to know. This is just sort of getting us started. But Mary Heather.
I guess my question, and I don't know, Peter, whether you'll be able to speak to this or not, or Logan, whether you've heard anything, but I'm curious about the coordination of this movement, this change with any additional state level spending controls that we might anticipate?
So there are no additional state level spending controls in the bill dealing with this. And, you know, honestly, if you think about it, whichever system you choose, some districts are going to frankly receive more money, or they're going to choose, I should say, they're going to choose to spend more money. And then those districts who are negatively impacted, are they going to spend less? So, you know, this has the potential to have state spending on education simply grow very quickly. I think that's sort of the untalked about impact of this. But the idea is that, you know, districts like ours or CVU or Mount Mansfield or Essex have sort of taken more resources out of the ed fund. And I'll give you how to explain that better than those who haven't. And it's basically a fairly sizable redistribution of resources. So the way you can think about it is, so the ed fund is all state dollars, right? We have a fully state funded system, and it's, let's call it $2 billion. When we go to the ed fund to get our money on a per equalized pupil basis, we're taking out $20,000. When Barry goes, they take out $15,000. So that inequity is what people have been arguing about all this time, and which is sort of laid bare in the original report that looked at study of this.
Thank you.
And this is a question, I think, for Logan. So it's my understanding, and correct me, and Peter as well, because we have a merger grant for our small schools, right, that because we voluntarily merged way back in 2016 or whatever, that's why we don't qualify for the rural calculation, correct?
Yes, but we also don't qualify because...
and also density.
Right, we don't have because we're looked at as one single district, and one of our towns happens to be rather large, it sort of throws off our density and scarcity.
Right.
But it becomes irrelevant because we will continue to maintain the merger support grant.
So, Logan, how much is the merger, you know, how much do we get? And I have no clue. How much do we get?
150,000.
150,000 total?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm totally wrong on that. That's what we got to support it. It's I think we're the largest receiver of this, and it's over $400,000.
400.
And what it really is the sum total of the small schools grants that we got when we merged.
Yeah, when you said 150,000, I caught myself. Yeah, 400,000.
400,000. Okay. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions for Logan? Chip?
Are we assuming that this will be voted on by the time Ruth Hardy comes?
I hope so.
Okay.
There's going to be, and like I said, as sort of the reality of what the difference is between the cost factor and the pupil weighting is becoming more and more aware to people, there's, I think, going to be more pushback on it.
Can I just ask one other question relative, because somebody asked it earlier about our relativeness amongst all the school districts, especially the consolidated districts in the state. You used the term 5 or so, talking about like CVU or us or whatever. Now, I'm trying to put my head around this idea of this and the original Brigham's thing about equalized tax collection and funding.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a part of this, just because of what you said, that whichever you choose, there can be a disincentive to spend the money on the students that you're trying to support in a different way. Which was part of what I think Brigham tried to say, was that you can't, even though you don't have a great taxing, you can't have a really low spending school and not do what you're wanting to do relative to others. It's got to be equalized. So
that's right. Anyway, so Brigham was really about equal access to the education fund. or equal taxing capacity.
Right.
I can't remember. Somebody explained it to me much better. Whereas, this is different. And one thing I just will point out, the reason why there are, we hate to say it this way, but winners and losers, is because if you think about, if you looked at those weights, the weight for EL students is, it's really large. The weight for poverty is quite large. So, those weights, you're dividing up the same pie just differently. And so if you don't have a lot of EL students and you don't have a lot of poverty, then, you are going to be, your pie, piece of the pie is going to shrink and others are going to go up. So you can imagine a lot of the sort of weight of the state goes up to Chittenden County because of all the EL students, or more impoverished areas. I had something fascinating to add on to that, but it's gone out of my head. And so it's, it's sort of where the weights pull resources.
But and I would assume that the logic behind that is that those communities for whom, or those who don't have a lot of ELL or poverty, or families living in poverty, have a greater tax capacity to, if they want to spend more, then they.
So I would say they don't have a lot of tax capacity, but they just tend to be better resourced within the community and choose to spend more.
Right.
All right, this is just the beginning. We're gonna have lots more opportunity to discuss this.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and if folks have questions about this as we sort of go through it, I'm happy to send me an email. I'll be happy to talk about it further.
Thank you. And thank you, Logan, for simplifying what seems to be a very complex issue. Appreciate it.
Victoria, could Logan send us the charts he used? I don't think it's in the board pack, right?
Sure, could you share those?
Yes, I can. I'll give them to Sharon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And back to Caitlin.
Thanks. The last part of our superintendent's report is a presentation from Nicole and me on our coordinated curriculum and student services. And normally we would be presenting this together. I'll just introduce it briefly, and I think you'll have a more dynamic experience with Nicole presenting it from the room. We're pretty excited about this work, or I'm very excited about this work. We've been returning to versions of this slideshow since we started collaborating at length in August on it. It introduces changes to law and rules in Vermont, Act 173 and Rule 2360, which are about student services, multi-tiered systems of support, and special ed law. And we see these as really, really closely related to our curriculum and making sure that we provide access and set students up for success within our common curriculum. So, as I said, we've been working on this slideshow for different audiences all school year, and each time we refine it, we come to a better understanding, shared understanding together. So we're excited to share it with you today, and I'm going to let Nicole take it from here, and I'll just be in the background if there are questions that come my way.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hello. Nice to be back. Okay, so hopefully the clicker will work this time. So this is, like Caitlin said, I think this is the third or fourth iteration of our attempt to share the work. This is a big education policy night to first talk about the weighting and now talk about all the changes. It may bring up lots of questions that we don't have answers for, and Caitlin's role sometimes when I'm doing the talking is to write down the questions so we can get answers to you. So we will get answers to you if we don't have them tonight. So access success.
I'll do that tonight, Nicole.
Thank you. I didn't expect your voice to come over in the middle of the room like that. That was a little weird. Thanks, Caitlin.
Sorry.
So access, success, and belonging, building a system to support all learners. So the purpose of this slideshow was created for you all, although from here it will then go out to schools, is to help you, the ACSD board, and community members to better understand significant changes in Vermont's educational policy environment. So this is sort of like, we want to teach you what we understand. We also, in doing that, similar to the weighting study, we want to prepare you and community members to support staff and students as this transition begins to unfold. It starts July 1st. And like all change, people will need support. And so it's really important to us that you all understand and that we have a sense of being in it together. So here's the background for those of you who have not been following this story closely. I hope it's okay if I move. I do a better job teaching when I can move. Is in 2016, the Vermont State Legislature directed the AOE to research SPED Ed practices and finances. DMG and UVM studied the topics. They then passed Act 173, essentially to improve effectiveness, availability, and equity of services. And at the same time, and Peter Conlon might have better insight than I do about this, at the same time, because they were doing that, they had to open up Special Education Rule 2360 for public comment. It was not their core, that was not their goal, and it happened. In doing that, the funding model for special education, which was coming out of Act 173, changes, becomes more flexible, and special ed rules have been significantly rewritten. So it's two big changes happening at the same time. I'm gonna keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. So here are the three key changes, as simply put as we could find a way to say it. Key change number 1, flexible funding. So the special education funding becomes a block grant with a weighted formula. We just talked about that. Districts can offer flexible practices by personnel, time, and place. We have a lot more flexibility with what we can do with our special education dollars. Change 2 is MTSS, multi-tiered systems of service, are required. It's always been a best practice, at least for the past 5 to 10 years. It's now going to be required. And it's important to note that an MTSS is not about kids. It's about staff practices. Practices become tiered so that they can be implemented with greater flexibility based on data. So the idea is that staff can move flexibly through the day to provide what kids need. And then lastly, special education rules. We have new rules that are aligned with federal special education regulations. Several of the fundamental changes are eligibility, so how you become identified, personnel requirements, what staff can do, and service delivery, how we get the learning to kids. Key change number 1, flexible funding. If this were a touchscreen, I could touch it and it would go straight to the grant we'll get for next year, right? So next year, rather than being reimbursed for every special education service, we just get, I keep saying to people, it's like we're gonna get a big box of money. So we get, and it's built to change over time. It's weighted. You just heard about it, poverty, etc. Everyone gets the same base amount, then we add on the weighting factors. So next year, some of you know this already, we get almost what we get this year. I think we're down 60,000. That's the first year. And for us, it keeps going down unless something changes.
Wait, I thought this didn't get voted in yet.
No,
This is different.
This is special ed money.
This is special ed waiting.
Yeah, this is, so, first of all, a couple of corrections. There are no weighting factors with the census block grant. It's just based on how many students you have. And this is a funding model that we are just starting to move toward, where schools will be given a block grant based on their ADM, on the number of students that they have. And that money comes with far fewer strings attached, with the idea being that all schools will do a better job of addressing the needs of all students and therefore have fewer students on IEPs and special ed.
That's an excellent summary.
And it was really developed because Vermont is a real outlier in the number of kids that we identify as needing special education services. Real outlier.
Real outlier. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So here's key change number 2. this is, you've seen this before, the MTSS framework in its simplest form. This is sort of originally what it looked like, public health model. The idea that we have tier 3, which is your most intensive support practices. Your focus is to about 5% of your practices are happening in an intensive way. 10 to 15 are targeted. You're looking for early detection and to respond to it. But that the majority of your practices are universal, that students can access, find success, and feel belonging through the core curriculum in the greatest number possible. And then we have this blue part. This is you. This is us. This is the policy context. This is where the decision making and the planning happen to then support these 3 tiers. So key change number 2 and number 3. So with the MTS and rules change, the big picture for us in this room right now is that we influence the policies and we collaborate with stakeholders to affect what's going to happen. So us having conversations about MTSS, us understanding how it works, can then influence our making decisions so that we can support our staff and our students. So behind all of these things that happen here are school boards, superintendent, directors, and school leaders understanding what kind of policies, what kind of procedures do we need to have to help make this work. So talking about tier 3, the special ed rules change. So that 5% intensive support practices is access and success through the core curriculum. And there are a number of significant changes. I tried to, Caitlin and I went through this a couple times, trying to make it as clear as possible. So special education service providers, the staff with the skill to support progress. So the idea is that we're changing from only a special educator to any staff who has the skill to provide the service. That's a significant change. One of the reasons special education has been so expensive is because we've said only these people can do this thing. Now we're going to say there are a lot of people who can do this thing.
Is there any extra training that, certification that, if I was just a general educator in math, would I need to then take some additional coursework though to?
Yeah, it's a good question. We all take additional coursework to maintain our licensure.
Yeah.
What this prepares us to do is to differentiate that so that we begin taking coursework based on what we need to have a skill that's needed.
Right, which may be more in depth.
It may be, and it's also, there are students who, it's not a fancy special training, it's being a really good math teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So it will really be about who has the skill that the student needs. Okay, the next change will be adverse effect. So for those of you who don't know, right now to become eligible for special education, it's for the 15th percentile, right? You have to show that you're having, right, your disability is having an adverse effect. You all know this. You're all shaking your heads like, yes, okay, great. It's changing to evidence-based instructional data being required. That's a big change. So we're going to be looking for, are students getting the instruction they need? And then if not, how do we get it to them? And then, how can we do that?
How do we do that?
Right now we do it, I get a packet when somebody thinks a student may need an evaluation, I get a packet. Sometimes they're this thick with everything that's been tried and all the data. And if we see that a student's not making progress with evidence-based instructional, then we know. And then lastly, IEPs will include functional skills, behavior, community skills, life skills. Written parent input will become part of an IEP. And the goals will change so that you have to have more data. So this is, right now, all the special education and administrators have received a binder this thick with all of this information. So this is like, I tried to get it down into like one sentence. These are 3 big changes. for special educators and general educators in the district right now, this feels big. This feels big. It is big. Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Nope, I think so.
Okay, so that was tier 3. So tier 2, that's where we have targeted practices. So they're not intensive, meaning they don't need to be created for the individual student, right? It's not that you're getting a special kind of instruction. Instead, you're getting more instruction. You're getting more focused instruction in an area. And those are also aligned with evidence-based metrics and processes, and we also use data. It affects classroom teachers and interventionists because those tier 2 supports, they don't happen in a room outside of the classroom. They happen in the classroom or they happen in a different space. So the idea, what you said was so eloquent, is that we're trying to pull away from needing everything to be intensive and instead get kids at where they are in the classroom so they can be with their peers and they can be with their teacher and they can still get all their needs met for learning. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. The last thing, the biggest tier 1, 80% universal practices. So the idea is that curriculum and instruction is designed to ensure access, success, and belonging for most learners. This is sometimes known as universal design for learning. The idea that we can find ways to teach kids so that there's multiple access points. So to make this happen, to get to this is the goal. This is what the state is now saying is required. They've always encouraged it, but starting July 1st, this is what every school in the district will be responsible for creating, so that, like Peter Collins said, most of our learning and needs will get met down here. Yeah.
And do you think, so the percentages are the percent of time spent or the percent of personnel in those practices, not the percent of students at each tier, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And the state doesn't hand us those numbers, right? The state's not saying you have to get these numbers. Instead, this is what the model is designed to do. It's a public health model that says, kind of like with smoking, if you can get people down here, if you can help people down here, you don't need to spend all these resources up here. And then for the places where these practices need to happen, you could really hone in on getting needs met up there. So that's sort of like the concept, is most people can learn in the classroom universally. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Caitlin, you're still there?
I'm here.
Anything you would add that I missed?
No, you're doing a brilliant job.
Thank you, Caitlin. Okay, so stage 1. The work is already underway, right? So we're not starting this work on July 1st. We started it in 2016. So starting in 2016, ACSD educators built a pre-K-12 IB curriculum and a proficiency-based model of learning and assessment for the universal. This is required by the state starting July 1st. We are light years ahead because we have a coordinated curriculum, which is the bedrock of an MTSS system. So that happened. We can check that off the list. Do we still need to do work to keep it going? Absolutely. Do we have it? Yes. At the same time, the System of Services Design team, they were researching what needs to happen, right, to ground everything within an equitable learning framework. And leaders defined their vision, focusing in on access, success, and belonging. So leaders came together and said, these are the core tenets of our system. They said that we, meaning all educators, will have a vision for learning focused on students' strengths, interests, and engagement. They said that we, all educators, will design learning through the inquiry cycle to engage and inspire learners and foster agency and voice. We, all educators, will help learners develop their understanding of the world, their place in it, and how they contribute to it. All students, families, and educators will have a shared sense of responsibility to their communities and value connection with, understanding of, and respect for all. And that together we will foster an open-minded, caring community where students feel a sense of safety, belonging, and significance. It's quite beautiful. So the idea is that as leaders, we are implementing an MTSS system so that we can bring these 5 elements of our vision to life. We're not doing it because the state is telling us. We're doing it because it's going to be good for kids and it's going to help us get to this place. Is that true, Jen? Did I miss anything? No? Okay. I'm asking Jen because she, I didn't know you were going to be in the room tonight. You were there. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Building stronger systems. So this is what we're doing starting this year. We're increasing our capacity to meet diverse learning needs in the classroom. So we've been really focused on universal design and targeted practices. I think by now you've probably heard about it, right? So we've got some schools really digging into universal, and then we have interventionists and some teachers really trying to figure out how do we get the best targeted practices into the classroom for math and literacy. We've been aligning roles and responsibilities with expertise. We've been trying to focus on people's skills, not their titles, because it's skills that help kids learn, not titles. So we've been trying to figure out how do we build those skills, making sure that differentiated PD is happening for people. And we've been differentiating support for students who struggle. So needs-based professional development to develop universal design and differentiation skills for all tiers. So the law actually says that we have to do this. We started doing it quite a while ago and we're continuing to do it, which is the idea that not every teacher learns the same thing as part of PD, right? They get to learn the thing that's going to be most impactful in their school for their kids, which for some people might be learning more about Bridges math, whereas for somebody else it might be learning about Orton Gillingham so that they can improve their literacy. And last, increasing our data-driven decision-making for instruction and intervention. Staff collaboration to solve problems. We will continue to focus on EQS, coordinated curriculum, proficiency-based teaching, and improving our systems of support and access, and Act 77, flexible pathways. So these 2 things, which have been underway for quite a while, will continue as we build our system. And this is the system we are trying to build. Any questions? Yeah.
So how do we get there from where we're at? I mean, I was in a 7th grade math class today, and I was a math interventionist kind of role being in there, which actually I can do, you know. There is just so much diversity of learning needs. And wow, how can a teacher do it? And it wasn't working so well today. You know, the kids were kind of bouncing off the walls, some of them. And I was like, how can I help? You know? Yeah, so it's just like that reality. And I just this sounds wonderful. And I just then think, how do we get from where we are now and get to where we need to get? It's almost like you have to start with this at the young age, right? You know, and because once those bad habits and, you know, the lack of learning happens, it just gets worse and worse, it seems, you know, for some kiddos. Yeah, so, you know, this is humongous. It's, you know.
Yes. Yes.
Nicole, can I take a stab at that one?
Yeah, please.
Not alone, right? Well, I think that we need to understand the problems that you're identifying, Barb, are real. And they've always been real, and we see some of these inequities and gaps in learning are exacerbated at this point in time for a lot of reasons that we understand and some that we don't. So this is, I think that this conceptual framework is exciting and implementing it is challenging, and it's going to take a lot of work and some significant professional learning, and then a lot of collaboration around really looking at the data and the evidence of what's working. We have another version of this slideshow that elaborates the sort of feedback loops in this system and which teams of people need to communicate at different points to get students access to the services they need. That's also conceptual in its design at this point, and we have a lot of work to do over the coming years to really implement that well. So collaborative, data-driven decision-making with a lot of feedback loops and communication and some real vulnerability for all of us as educators is, you know, it's not a clear step-by-step formula, but I would say it's the frame that we're taking to approach this work.
Mary Heather?
I have a question for you about how this impacts families' sort of journey through the evaluation process. How, I mean, because typically, I mean, I can speak to my experience, you know, you've got a kiddo you're worried about, you have some data, maybe not all the data that you are required to have, but, and you sort of request an evaluation, and then there's the gates that you need to go through and all that. How do these changes impact that journey for a family?
It depends on the eligibility category that we're looking at. I would say for some eligibility categories, it makes things feel a little bit more accessible. And then for specific learning disability, I imagine it could feel less accessible because the significant change is that the state is saying we're now going to follow the federal rules, which say that we have to dig really deeply if it's a disability or if it's a lack of access to good instruction.
Right.
So that could feel like I'm not getting this thing that used to be.
Right.
And hopefully that's not the place people will stay in, because the idea is what you're really getting is the good instruction. That it'll force the good instruction.
Right.
It'll just feel a little different.
Yeah, like I guess I'm just wondering whether there's, and at what level I would imagine, you know, okay, we're gonna try X, Y, and Z. Let's see if that works, and how much time do you give for that potential solution to work its magic before then you implement another step and another step, hoping that those interventions will work before officially qualifying a student for more intensive services. I'm just curious what that timeline, is that developed at the district level, or is that developed at the state level, or how would that look?
So it's not a set timeline. There's best practices around it, that the first stage is 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. And then going back and refining for another 6 to 8 weeks. The state is also allowing us to add testing if we think it's necessary.
Okay.
So the conversation we've had as an eval team is when we're in a situation like the one you're describing, what testing will we add, right? So we're allowed to do a hybrid. So I imagine it will look like that.
Okay, thank you.
I don't.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay, I forgot I don't call on people.
Go ahead, Chip, and then Jamie.
Old habit.
For Barb's comment, obviously from the public perception or the parents' perception, of children in classrooms that are affected by children who are going to come under this. This is a really important part of this whole equation, and we as a board heard it, the public heard it, and it was there, and it's there in other districts, not just because of COVID, but because of this type of, it's an ideal way to look at it. It sounds wonderful, but from the practical point of view, if you're the parent of a child who is not being questioned as to whether they have any disability or learning problems or whatever, but is markedly being affected in the classroom by that child who is, and we don't have the tools to manage it completely, it's a real public problem. Perception-wise, it's a real problem, both in support of the school, money-wise, taxes, and just from the point of view of where you go with it. So I applaud it all, but I just, there's a lot of rose-colored glasses here as to how we get to where we're gonna get to, and I worry about that a lot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't want to speak too much for Caitlin, but I think we're working really hard not to have rose-colored glasses.
I know you are. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but as a school board member, if I hear anything from the public, it's about these kinds of issues. It really is. And not in as academic a way as this.
Right.
It's like, so what are you gonna do about that?
Right.
And that's what you're saying. And, you know, it's not gonna happen just because we changed some culture in kindergarten and they're gonna be fine throughout. That would be lovely too, but I don't know.
Right.
I just point out that that's the kind of stuff that I hear as a board member. And I don't have a way to impact it other than talking to you right now, so.
I'm glad you're talking to me.
Yeah, well, I know.
So Chip, I'd like to say, I tend to put on rose-colored glasses. I tend to get very optimistic about things, so I'm open to that critique. And also, it will take us time to do this well. And when we get to a place where we're implementing MTSS well, and really implementing the feedback loops and the systems and the structures, and we have the data-driven processes defined, that's all work to be done, and it's big work to be done. It will be much easier for us to answer those questions from the public about what will you do when, because we'll have systems that are consistent across our schools and common expectations and common understandings of what we do when to get students the access to the supports that they need, ideally sooner than they necessarily are getting them now. So it is big work, and it's big work for our teachers. I think it's also important to know that Nicole and I have been leaning into this pretty deeply this year and trying to get the message out to our colleagues as much as possible. But school goes on, and teachers and principals and all of our colleagues are really busy, and so taking the time through our professional learning next year to bring people on board and start designing solutions together and really engaging and understanding this together will be a big project that will absorb a lot of our collective attention over the next couple of years.
Jamie.
Thanks so much for this presentation. It's very helpful. I just want clarity on the skills, not titles thing. Like, to me that, so is the issue that there will be a greater number or prevalence or rate of people dealing with special ed type issues who are not technically trained or whatever as special educators? And if so, where is the evidence that that's a good idea?
Yeah, so that's not how
it.
No. So right now, the state only reimburses for certain personnel categories. So there are only certain people that the state will say can provide a service to a student who qualifies for an IEP. Federal law actually says, no, you can have, if you've got a kid who needs a certain thing and you've got a staff over here who has that skill, The IEP team can say this is the person who provides the teaching. And that person doesn't have to be a special educator.
But right now they do.
Yes.
So then,
And we've got lots of staff who have tremendous skills who are not special educators. But we've been living in this Vermont context that says only the special educator can provide it.
One really concrete example would be a reading interventionist who has depth of training and knowledge in reading instruction and reading intervention, but doesn't have a special education license. If a child is struggling with reading, perhaps the most highly skilled person in the school is not a special educator, and now we can use our skills more flexibly to serve students.
okay. So now there is a chance that we will, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just curious. There is a chance that there'll be more non-special ed officially trained people in IEP situations, let's say, or something like that. Yeah.
Hopefully pre-IEP.
Hopefully pre-IEP.
You're intervening.
In the tier 1.
Yeah, you're intervening before you
Okay.
get to that level.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful.
The only slight I mean, it's so hard not to get in the weeds on this stuff.
Okay.
So I'm like, where do I get in the weeds? The slight thing is that special educators are trained to be case managers. They're trained to understand the law. They're trained to understand the processes. That's sort of what differentiates a special educator.
I see.
They don't necessarily, it's being skilled for literacy or math. Really, almost anyone who's a teacher can take the training for specific things.
Sure, okay, thank you.
And that's what's been keeping us from, in Vermont, it's prevented us from being able to really dig into all these skilled people who work for us who can help our kids.
Thank you. Do you anticipate there's going to be a change in the ratio of licensed teachers to students? I'm worried about the classroom teacher who is overseeing a classroom of kids and their different levels of instruction and making sure that he or she is able to manage them and make sure that they get the proper intervention that they need. It seems overwhelming for a classroom teacher and then to also try to do the universal teaching. So I'm worried about the classroom teacher having the time to do all that.
Thank you, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, the model isn't designed that everything rests on the shoulder of the classroom teacher. It's designed so that classroom teachers can also provide interventions. So hopefully, right, so we're at the beginning of building this part of it. Hopefully, we're really leaning into not putting everything on the shoulders of classroom teachers, but figuring out in its ideal form, and again, it's the ideal form, is an MTSS helps a school system become a flexible web of providers. So the idea that we can have people move in and out of the classroom, we can have classroom teachers doing this or that, versus everybody having a box and only doing this one thing. I ask you to help us make sure that doesn't happen.
I know.
That's why we're here.
I just see, the classroom's like a family, right? The teacher is like the parent. He or she is kind of managing everything that goes on in that classroom, in addition to planning for the day and making sure and contacting, speaking with parents and being the integrated. It's just, I'm worried about making sure that they have the support they need and that we keep the class ratio at a place where it is more manageable. So, when we're looking at, that's one of our policies that we're looking at is class size. And we don't want to make it so difficult for them to do that well.
Yes, agreed, 100%.
So, yes, you're right, you're not putting 100% of the responsibility on the teacher's shoulders, just 80%. I'm sorry, but that's what I see here, and I'm having a real hard time, because I've been in these rooms where there's 20 kids in there, and there is a highly skilled literacy teacher in there who knows what she's doing, spending 75%, and I am not exaggerating here, of the time working with 3 students who are really, really struggling with literacy, while the rest of the class is given, I'm not gonna say busy work, because I'm not gonna call that teacher out by that, but they are not getting that teacher's attention for 25% of the class, and that is happening right now. Now, you're saying that all of these interventions are gonna take place, 80% of them are gonna take place at the classroom level. I'm not seeing how that's gonna work unless you're putting more people in there. And it's not, I'm not trying, I'm real scared, you know, the pie in the sky stuff that everybody else is talking about. This is really not pie in the sky to me. This is like a nightmare as a classroom teacher. I'm responsible for every kid that comes through here, every IEP that comes through here, and giving the correct instruction to all these kids. And we know that the IEP is a legal document that has legal, so when does our nurse go in front of the trial judge and say, your mistake cost this kid their education, you're going to prison? Because that's a legal document. When does the teacher get sued? If you're putting 80% of all education on the classroom teacher, what happens at the universal level, because that's what the universal level is, it's in the classroom, are they getting all the support that they need to do that, to do the literacy intervention, to do all the special education stuff, all the check boxes that need to be checked? Because I'm not hearing those resources being there. I'm hearing that this is on, you're right, not 100%, 80%. That's a lot. And you're scaring me a lot right now for the teachers.
Yeah. So Steve, I think that this goes back to, I want to go back to what I said to Barb earlier, where none of this gets solved in isolation, right? No, we can't expect any one teacher alone in a classroom to carry all of this change. We are a community of professional educators, including teachers, para-educators, interventionists, coordinators, coaches. We have to come together and understand how we'll strengthen our Tier 1 services for students, our Tier 1 curriculum and instruction collaboratively. And we won't live into the ideal overnight, but this is an extended process that needs to be supported and needs to be done, again, not in isolation.
All right. Any other last comments, Joanna?
The last slide you put up had EQS and the flexible pathways. I'm pretty sure I know what the flexible pathways is. Is that the high school level where you can, so what's the EQS and what's that system and how does it play out now?
I'm gonna let Caitlin respond to that question.
Yep, the Ed Quality Standards are a Vermont guidance document around the basic requirements for school to provide for students, so, and for, I should say, for our whole learning community. So they define things like the requirement to have a coordinated curriculum. They put some guardrails up around class size. It's a lengthy document of rules for education. They require a comprehensive, I'm losing the terminology, local assessment plan, those sorts of details about how our curriculum and our schools should be run.
Is that audited? Is that overseen by, at the state level, or test scores part of that, or?
That's an interesting question. I've never heard of an EQS audit. We've done in the past internal field reviews from the Agency of Education where they do come and evaluate us, and it's been a handful of years since they've done that. I think we use it predominantly as a reference document when we're making decisions, and we say, well, what does EQS say about that? So it's sort of at our fingertips as decision makers in schools.
Got it. So they're different in that flexible pathways is an ACSD thing.
No, so Act 77 is the act around personalization and flexible pathways, and the premise is that, so it's EQS and Act 77 are two different but related guidance documents.
Okay.
So we are required to provide students with flexible pathways to graduation. And boy, it might have been in December that Cindy Atkins and Justin Campbell came and did the presentation to the board about, sort of a window into the flexible pathways for our juniors and seniors in the high school. And they mean to continue to build that resource, sort of telling the story of the different ways that a student can walk their way through the high school experience in Middlebury.
And find success.
I should say, apropos of that question and a previous question about if you, under pupil weighting, if you all of a sudden are getting a lot more money or a lot more taxing capacity, how do you know that it's going to be used for what you want it to be used for? And it's all based on EQS, Educational Quality Standards. And one thing this bill calls for is a much more robust, I hate to use the word enforcement, but enforcement of EQS to make sure that in fact schools are giving their students all the opportunities they should be.
And that, coming back to Steve to what you're saying and Mary to what you're saying, is that's why Caitlin and I wanted to get this to you in front of you so that we could start having these difficult conversations, because this comes with requirements and a mandate that we haven't known before, and we're gonna have to dig in really deep, and so making sure we're all starting from this is what the state's requiring felt like a really important thing to do.
Okay, last two questions.
Mine's not a question, mine's a comment.
Okay.
Mine is, yes, there are students that in a classroom may appear as disruptive, difficult, but yet there are also students that are on IEPs that wish they could be in the classroom because, and I'll give a personal example, my son was on an IEP and he was shunned into IEP room to be taught. But when he came back into the classroom, the teacher didn't know how to teach him because it was two parallel systems and one person didn't want to talk to the other one. So my son struggled all the way through school in this district with that. So I caution us to be very careful and considerate how we talk about students that are with special needs, because they also have feelings and they know what's going on around them. I mean, my son knew all the way through school where he stood in relationship to his classmates, and he struggled with it, and it wasn't fair to him. So I just caution you to be very cognizant when you speak of special ed students, how you speak of them.
Thank you. Who was the last one? Jamie, did you?
Yeah, so the policy committee just adopted a policy on special ed. Like, I think we had it and we just re-upped it. It's very basic, like it's like 10 sentences. I think it says basically we provide a, what does FAPE stand for? Whatever that stands for.
Free readiness to public education.
Thank you. And I'm just curious if this new system, I'm not asking you to wait on this committee, but if it suggests the need for a more robust or interesting or complex policy guidance for us.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the state, that policy that you adopted hyperlinks to the state having for the first time given all districts that adopt that policy a pretty robust set of regulations that align with this.
Okay.
So that those tier 3 practices are now statewide and they align with federal law, which has been a real gap. So it's, the policy itself reads minimally.
I see.
But that packet is pretty intense.
Okay.
And just to add to that, it's, Jamie, it's D7 is the special ed policy, it's the SBA model that we adopted, adding our district name to it. And it's posted online on the ACSD website under board and policies and procedures, and linked directly below it is that much more robust packet of procedures that Nicole was just referring to.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Great. Thank you both. I liked when you said that you all felt that this was sort of a time to get this in front of us, because we're going to need to dive deep going forward. I think this is a great first stab, and I appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions and comments as well. So let's hope we have many more productive conversations. Thank you both.
Thank you all.
All right, on to report of the board. I'm gonna flip 1 and 2 so that we can get poor Jen out of here a little earlier.
No, but not poor Bruce. Oh, he's at home.
What's that?
I was gonna say, but not poor Bruce.
Well,
But
I
he's at
know,
home.
Bruce is at home, so. Sorry, Bruce.
He's hanging out in the library.
You're hanging out at Hogwarts Library. So, Magilton Fund.
Yeah. So I came before the board in the, wait, you want me to stand up front?
No.
In the fall to do kind of the fall distribution of McJilton. You know, just in looking through documentation, I think it's been done differently, but typically it doesn't, you know, somebody in like February does a big chunk for the following year, and that hasn't felt super responsive, especially during the pandemic. So I'm here, and I kind of said in the fall, the board voted to fund some PE equipment for continued PE opportunities, as well as an artist in residency that is underway. And so I come with 3 other requests to kind of round up the year. The first one, and the first 2 are kind of together. I think you should have this in your packet.
Yes.
It's just an experience, like a theater experience. So providing an opportunity for students to go see Mario the Maker Magician, which has happened, and so we have funds that can cover it, but we'd like to use those funds for professional development. So I'd like to propose that McJilton cover it instead, and then also $3,000 so that the 5th graders can do Shakespeare, It's Elementary, or some version of that this year with Town Hall Theater. And then the second is the biggest part, and it's historically been the biggest part of that McJilton has funded, at least over the documents I've seen, is so that the 5th grade can go to Keewaydin Environmental Education Center. So the total of that, of the fall requests and these totals $38,986.19 or something, or no, that's the annual distribution, sorry, which is about 2,000 more than what the overall request was. That's excluding the distribution that we could have gotten in December for 44,000. There just has been like a lot of kind of extra in the fund that hasn't been fully used, so we're trying to draw down the fund so that we can start next year with just a distribution.
Great. Questions?
The monies we're drawing on are the growth in the fund every year.
Yes, but they are.
The fund is an endowment which puts out
Yes.
a certain amount of, yes.
Yes, but we haven't taken the distribution, I think, in 2 years because
Right.
there was so much.
Right,
in
and
there.
generally we say sort of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's between 3 and 4% is
It's
what.
4.5% of the past 5 quarters.
Got it.
Like that.
But the
Or
Keewaydin
12
has always been one of the bigger
Yes.
ones, and we didn't do that during
Yeah.
COVID, so.
Right, exactly. Yep.
All right, yes.
I think it's important for everybody knowing, and especially our new board members, this is a private endowment set up to benefit Mary Hogan. It now becomes sort of our responsibility when we became a unified board, but it still is there to only benefit Mary Hogan. And can you remind me who makes the decisions, or who sort of comes up with the proposal? I know we make the decision.
It's the principal comes up with the proposal that then is brought to the board. And if you're interested in the history of the McJilton Fund, I have like a bunch of documents that have been put together, but it's existed since 1950.
We have 2 of these. There's another one that benefits Cornwall, the name of which I can't remember.
Gilligan.
Gilligan.
Yeah, but that runs differently. It doesn't come through the board.
Right. Can I get a motion?
I'll move.
Second?
Why don't we state what the motion is?
Well, Mary kind of jumped in and said, I second.
You're good at stating. Go ahead.
So I move to approve the request from Mary Hogan for use of McMilton funds of $3,230 for the K-4 theater, $303,000 for Shakespeare, and $17,360 for spring requests for Keewaydin, and we've already approved the fall.
You approved the fall, yes. I just thought somebody would ask, so I figured it was better to include it.
Great. And a second?
Second.
By Mary, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Any abstained? Terrific. Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Jen.
staying around.
Yes, and thrilled that the kids are getting back to Keek. I know in the superintendent's report, there are a bunch of schools that are sending
Yeah,
it.
parents are super excited, kids are super excited,
Yeah.
teachers are excited, it's really
Yeah, that's great.
awesome. That and like all school meeting tomorrow, it's like, we're doing it all in the month of April.
I like. All right, and now, Bruce is here. This document that perhaps everybody read was something that was sent to Peter. I don't believe there's actually been any communication yet between the town of Middlebury, but he just felt it was something that we should get on our radar. Bruce, is there anything you'd like to add? Or
well, this gets me excited. So, and as some of you may remember, back in 2016, they did do like a public study of changing the intersection in front of the school at Charles Ave, Monroe, and Court Street. And you know, they had several different ideas, a rotary lining up the streets. So this is a study to move forward with the most popular decision, which was to realign Charles Ave with Monroe, so we'd actually have like a four-way stop instead of what we currently have. And so that this proposal is just for the engineering piece of it, but it's great because it's movement in the right direction. And I imagine some of you might have remembered the depiction they had on there at the meeting, which showed a lovely park-like setting right where the bus circle is. So I'm hoping that comes to fruition.
Right. And if I remember, or maybe I'm misremembering, but what happens to central office? If I imagine Monroe Street coming straight out, doesn't it sort of hit central office?
No, it comes midway down the faculty parking lot.
Okay.
And their proposal, they show a very small parking area adjacent to the central office building, and then moving the parking basically across the road from the school, although it's not really going to change location by much, but it would encompass what is currently Charles Avenue, up to where Charles Avenue is now, and then but the roadway would shift to basically the middle of the faculty parking lot.
A little historical
I was going to say,
perspective.
here comes the history.
A little historical perspective. Back in the 90s, when we did the high school and the middle school, there was a huge movement by some folks to say that we should be responsible, we the board of the Union District 3, to do just what this was going to be, which would have required taking by eminent domain, which we would have had to initiate the gas station, because that was the main holdup in most cases, and fund the whole thing. Obviously, that board, even though it seemed like a great idea from like traffic management, safety, all the rest of it, that wasn't our prerogative. Just putting in the middle school back in the 90s, the school board had to pay for that traffic light on Middle Road. So remember that, every time you go under it, that wasn't paid for by the town or by the state. That was paid for by the school district in order to build the middle school back where it is.
Oh, we need to fix the left turn. I didn't know who we needed to talk to, now I know. I've been talking to everybody.
The school doesn't,
It only allows 2 cars
the
to
school
go.
doesn't control it. All I'm saying
We
is
bought it, we can fix it. Hey, you saw me go through the yellow and you went through the red.
the
That's great.
historical experience is important, and I'm really, when I saw this come, when the gas station shut down, I wondered what was happening there. And then I started thinking, gosh, if this can lead to this, because this would make a huge,
Yeah.
huge difference. And we're not gonna lose parking spaces or anything else. It's gonna make it so much more organized, so,
It's safer.
yes.
Safer the way it is.
Peter?
So Bruce, what are we being asked to vote on? Just to say that we're on board with this process continuing?
We're not voting.
Okay, it's listed under an action item. Oh, no, it's not, I'm sorry. I got my,
Ones and twos.
I take everything I said back.
Yeah.
Except, here's my question for you, Bruce. Will I see this in my lifetime?
No guarantees, but I think you probably have a 50% chance.
It did say that there was supposed to be activity in March and April with the board. Now, as I said, Peter received this document, but he has not received any communication outside of the document, so.
Yeah.
We'll wait
And
and
I
see.
can tell you, I have a meeting scheduled Thursday afternoon with VHB and the town.
Oh, great.
And that's really gonna be their kickoff meeting, so they have not done anything.
Great.
And just,
Jen, question?
go ahead.
I didn't read every word of this document, I apologize if I'm asking you something that I could have read about. I believe the gist of what I read was that that initial 50,000 was being paid for not by us. What can we anticipate our responsibility being at some point? Would it be that we are responsible for redoing our driveway and parking lot? Is this all being funded by somebody else?
Good question.
That was my question, too.
I'm gonna be at the meeting on Thursday.
That's the select board meeting though, right? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Oh, the
these
other
are
meeting,
registered.
gotcha. Okay, so you don't know?
I don't know, I'll ask on Thursday.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
please. What's it gonna cost us?
I mean, I think it's worth it probably regardless. It would be good to know going in how much it's going to cost and how we're going to pay for it.
Just in my experience in doing things with the town in the past, typically the basic infrastructure and all that falls on the town. And then if the school is interested in augmenting it, whether we want, trees and benches or things like that, that may end up in our lap. But my initial reaction is the bulk of this work will be paid for through the town and V-Trans and whatever grants they can garner.
Fabulous. And seriously, can you fix that light?
We may have paid for it, but we don't own it.
Yeah. They would pay for it and turn it back over.
Jen, it's in that limbo place, not our, everybody.
It's a terrible light. Go ahead.
I'm not allowed access to the traffic light.
Ah.
I have two questions. One, for those of us who didn't see that initial study and those initial options, do you have a link to a report or something that you could provide the board so we can see kind of the artist's rendering of what the town is kind of moving forward with?
I'm sure the town has that. It wasn't anything I presented, so I don't have a copy. I will, again, Thursday I'll ask and see if I can get that rendering.
Yeah.
And some of the details from that public information meeting that they had.
Great. And then my second question has to do with the status of the gas station that's there and whether or not, and you may or may not know this, Bruce, but I'm just curious about the extent of any remediation that's been done on that property, because having worked in that sector, I'm sure there was significant impact. So I'm just curious.
I know when they took the tanks out, they had a hole there large enough to put central office in. So I don't know if that got it all. I imagine there's probably some monitoring wells in the area, but I don't know the status of that.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for Bruce? I'm sure this will come up on our agenda.
Very
again.
exciting.
It's been a varied meeting.
I know, yeah. A lot of good stuff. All right, does anyone have any other for other? Think about, I have one other, and that is there's been quite a lot of difficulty scheduling committee meetings. And so there's question as to whether or not we should go back to our pre-pandemic way of organizing committee meetings, which was to have them just before the first board meeting of the month.
Or the second board meeting.
Or the second board meeting. It was whichever one doesn't move. Yeah, second board meeting of the month. Are people just sort of a straw vote? Does that sound like a good thing to people? Or do I want to let committees meet and try to come up with times, regular times to meet?
It's hard for me to go home after work, so I just stay in town anyway and either just work or
Yeah.
waste time, so it's probably better for me to do that, so that it's like a wasted hour and a half unless there's a sports game or something.
Well, I think there's two considerations, and actually Joanna and I talked about this at our attempted meeting. One, having just a regular thing I think is much better for the public if they have any interest in coming or participating. So I think that's really an important factor. But yeah, second, just the, trying to coordinate everyone's schedule. It ends up being a real burden for the committee chair. So I would definitely advocate for going back to that model, even though that's not something I ever experienced, but.
It does get complicated if you're gonna have all those meetings on Zoom.
That's what I was gonna say as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's your
Because we only
nightmare.
have one of these, and, I mean, we, could look into getting more of them, but to have a bunch of committee meetings.
We used to sit in different rooms over in the high school. We don't have that.
It
at
was
least-
pre-Zoom.
Well, and do we have to Zoom all of our committee meetings?
It's
It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement.
So, I mean, maybe it's worth doing it in person and people can come and go to each of the committee meetings, which was the structure before.
Right.
Yeah, okay, all right, so think about this, we will, I think everybody, well, I think most committees have at least their first one scheduled.
Not yet. We haven't been able to find it done.
So we'll have first meetings and then, I'll talk with Will and Peter about the technology requirements and we'll try to come to it.
And the incentive would be that they give you dinner, for those of you.
Oh, that's true, yes, you do.
If you don't know that. Just so people know, you're not stuck there from 5:30 till 9 without food. They'll give us dinner between the committee meeting and the board meeting.
I also think that our meetings, we don't get much done in an hour. We actually need that, like 20 extra minutes. So, I just feel like an hour just cuts us so short.
You can start at 5.
You can start early.
We can start early, okay.
Yeah.
So we're not bound by the,
Yeah, no.
okay.
No.
Okay, all right.
Just that you would meet before the board
Right,
meeting,
okay.
since you're already there.
I move
anyway.
adjourned.
Yeah. Food for thought.
Good.
Could I have a motion to adjourn?
I think Chip already did it.
All right, Chip, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, excellent. Thank you very much, everyone.
Mary has
We have to set up at least one before.
Yeah.
I was, those choices I saw, everyone.
No, I did too.
So we might have
Signed up. So they can-
Steve,